Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. Cameron Moll, VP of Design and Research, and my team consists of product design, brand design, user research, and content design. And I'm going to speak to you about two of my favorite topics today, onboarding and product-led. But before we get there, let's talk first about my refrigerator, and specifically the dispenser on my refrigerator. Now, before we talk about that, we need to talk about one of these machines, which I know you've used countless times before. You know how it works. You put your cup underneath, you push the button, and the liquid comes out underneath. Now, if you use that dispenser on my fridge for the first time, I almost guarantee this is how it's going to work every single time you use that dispenser. I know this because we've had guests come over, and this is exactly how it functions for those guests. Now, we could say that this is not an exceptional onboarding experience. So what does it take to create an exceptional onboarding experience? Well, for that, we first need to look at what it means to be a product-led organization. And at product-led organizations, the product is the beating heart of that organization. It's ground zero for everything they do. Think of it like creating an experience where the only relationship with the customer happens through the product. Now, does this mean that your organization is automated, that it's all robotic, that there are no human beings? Well, no, of course not. It just means that human beings are doing high value work and the product is doing the heavy lifting. Human beings are doing the things that only they can do, and the product is taking care of the rest. Now, to make this happen, all parts of the business, not just what we think of like product and engineering as being product-led, but all functions across the business are part of this product-led experience. Finance, sales, marketing, customer success, you name it. They all align around the product, and they all have involvement in that experience, meaning some part of their functions, the things that they do and that they provide, exist inside of the product. Now, your organization might not do all of these things, but I would imagine they do most of them, if not all of them. Onboarding, education and training, customer advocacy, you might have a free trial, and all of these things can happen and should happen inside the product. Now, this also means that all of these functions have stakeholders that need to have involvement in this idea of being product-led as an organization. And that requires aligning around the product to make that alignment across the company happen most effectively for the customer experience. So if we look at moving from human-led to product-led, think about how the product can solve key challenges across the business, or you're moving from what humans can do to what the product can do. So each and every function is thinking strategically about how they can go from being purely human-led to these digital product-led activities. And often the best candidates for these product-led activities are the ones that are high volume, but low value. And so you have this opportunity to offload that low value work to free up humans to focus on the higher value activities. One of the more extreme examples of product-led is Amazon Go. It's this cashierless experience where you can walk in and walk out without ever having talked to a human being. Now, I've personally never walked into one of these stores myself. Maybe you haven't, but you've probably seen it in other ways in stores as they're now, let's say, creating hybrid models where they have some of their checkout being automated. So in Target, for example, you can walk into a Target and walk out with your goods, having perhaps never talked or interacted with a human being in that experience. So now let's talk about onboarding. And how do we create those strong first impressions with our customers, with our users? Well, we did some analysis, and found that users that have taken part in formal onboarding, human-led onboarding, had a higher sentiment measured by NPS as compared to all users. So what that meant is the NPS for those that went through this formal human-led onboarding was 42, whereas all users was 30. Does that mean that human-led onboarding is the route to higher customer satisfaction and sentiment? Well, of course not. It just means that there's an opportunity to have the product-led onboarding experience be as good as, if not better than, the human-led experience. Here's another example of this, another analysis that we did. And we found that users that came onto the product in the first 2 weeks of the account signing had a greater NPS sentiment, much higher in fact, than those that came in later after account signing. So imagine coming in those first 2 weeks, and you probably have some human-led training and onboarding that happens. But if you come in later, you probably don't have that same experience. And so you're just being dumped into the product. And what is your experience like? How do we make that product-led, no human being experience be as good as, if not greater, than the human-led one? One of the best ways to do this is to identify what your aha moments are. Aha moments are simply that point at which the light bulb goes off in the user's brain, and they're like, aha, this is great. I love this. And they get it and they retain. The aha moments are simply the intersection of analyzing what all the actions are that users take and looking at users that retain and identifying the overlap between those two things. And where that overlap is strongest is likely where your aha moments are contained. Here's the iconic Facebook example that they identified that if you could make 7 friends in the first 10 days as a new user of Facebook, you were much more likely to retain as a new user. Now, prior to Pendo, I was the head of design for the events platform at Facebook. And I can guarantee that the aha moment methodology is very much in play at Facebook, not just holistically these meta aha moments, but even in product areas. In the events team, for example, we had our own aha moments. We knew that as a new creator on Facebook of events, if we could get a number of users to express interest in your event within a first number of days, you were much more likely to retain as a new creator of the events platform. And so we then created compelling opportunities for people to express interest in your event in those critical first few days, so that we could increase the chances of you retaining as a new creator. Now, once you identify what those aha moments are, how do you lean into that? How do you create those compelling experiences to drive users to that outcome? Here's another example. Dropbox identified one of their key aha moments, and that is simply to save one file on one device. And so shortly after signing up, you can see in that third screen, they're making it very clear what that aha moment is. The plus icon at the bottom, they're graying out the rest of the screen, encouraging you to tap. And once you tap, you see scan document, upload photos, create or upload file. And so as you accomplish that outcome, not only do they know that you'll retain better, but you'll find greater value faster in becoming a new user of Dropbox. Now I want to look at a case study for Pendo proper. So not too long ago, December of last year, we launched Pendo Free. And the idea was to ship and provide a version of Pendo that was free to anyone and was fully product-led. Prior to this, most users, most new customers would go through a sales channel to be able to not only sign up for an account with Pendo, but to actually use the product for the first time. And so this was putting us into a world that amplified what product-led meant for Pendo, where it was entirely humanless. Now, if you go to Pendo today, you can tap on Try Now and you'll see this page, and you can dive in and start using Pendo free and experience what that is like. Now, we knew that for Pendo free, for all of Pendo for that matter, a very key aha moment is when you install Pendo on your app. So in order for Pendo to work, you need to install a script or leverage our SDK so that Pendo is installed on your app. And then you can start acquiring analytics. You can start engaging with your users in app. That was a very obvious aha moment for us. And so shortly after signing up for Pendo free, very quickly after signing up, in fact, we encourage you to follow this flow to install Pendo on your app. And once you do that, of course, we celebrate that aha moment being completed. Now you've installed Pendo on your app. Now what? All products, including ours, including yours, have this myriad of features and tools that when users sign up for the first time, it might look like this to them. All of these options, floors and shelves, what are the many things that users could potentially do after signing up for your product? How do we point them to things that really matter? And that was the question we were asking. Now, we have some very smart data analysts at Pendo that complement all of the data that we can run through Pendo and the other tools that we use. And they were able to identify some key aha moments for us. And one of those is to create an audience segment. So if you look at this retention curve, by the way, this is a very typical retention curve, not just for Pendo, but for Facebook, any product. This is what a typical retention curve looks like. You have somewhat of a drop off at the start, and then that levels off over time. And you can see the green line is the baseline retention. However, if you look at the yellowish orange line, that is users who create an audience segment. And that is to identify a segment that matters to your product area and to create that inside of Pendo. And you can see there's a much higher retention rate for those that complete that in the first few days, first few weeks of signing up as a new user. So the goal here is to identify what are some of those aha moments. How do we lean into those, make it compelling to complete those, and then lift that green line to be that future blue line of retention. So of course, given that analysis, we took that and inside of Pendo Free, created this guided experience to help you create your first segment. However, we learned something in this process. And that is that when we say new users, it's more nuanced than we might expect. Now, the terminology here is if you sign up as a new account, a new customer of Pendo, you can see that on screen here, coupled with being a new user at that account or at that customer. So on the left, you have a new user at a brand new account. You have a new user at an existing account that might come in, say, 6 months later after the account has signed up with Pendo. And then, oh, by the way, you also have seasoned users of any kind that are using a new feature that you've shipped for the first time, and they're also considered new users. Now, the key here, the key point is that that analysis we conducted that I mentioned was done with all Pendo users. And the lion's share, the majority of those users fall into this category. They're new users at an existing account, meaning they've come in months after the fact. They didn't receive, say, human-led onboarding. And so they fall into this category. But with Pendo Free, it is comprised almost exclusively of new users at new accounts, because this is a new organization signing up for Pendo. And therefore, all of their users are falling into this category. So once we understood this distinction, it allowed us to go back and analyze what are the key aha moments for this user group in particular. And one of those is to tag a page or a feature, or what other companies might call logging. It's basically where you identify what are the buttons, What are the pages that you care most about and that you want to track data for? Maybe there are things that exist inside your product area, and you want to run analytics for those given features, those buttons, those pages, and so forth. This is one of the key aha moments for Pendo Free. Because it's a new account, this stuff hasn't been tagged yet. You have yet, no one else, your coworker hasn't necessarily tagged that button that you care about or that page that you care about. And so you have the opportunity to tag that button, to tag that page. And so we create this guided experience where we walk you through how to tag pages and features inside of Pendo. Now for you, you have a palette of onboarding building blocks to choose from, walkthroughs and tooltips and light boxes, a landing pad, knowledge base, email, and of course, human beings. You might use some or all of these things. Pendo actually helps you with all of these things to make them more effective, to provide self-service opportunities to anyone in your organization to create these onboarding building blocks inside of your product. Now, there's something called progressive disclosure that applies here. And there are two ways to interpret what progressive disclosure means. In a UI UX sense, progressive disclosure is similar to this example that you're seeing here on screen. A user taps something, in this case, a checkbox, and additional information progressively discloses or shows to the user. That's one way to interpret it. Another way is to think about it in the context of onboarding. So like the examples I just showed and some examples here, as those new users come on board, you might show guides, light boxes to them that existing users don't need to see. And so you're progressively disclosing additional information that will help them have a successful product-led onboarding experience. This should be obvious to all of us, and that is onboarding becomes exceptional when we iterate and experiment. It wasn't enough for us to stop with the initial aha moments that we thought we identified, but we had to iterate and experiment to identify what those real aha moments needed to be for Pendo Free. And so iterate and experiment with your onboarding tactics and approaches. And of course, measure success. What are the things that matter to you to measure successful, exceptional onboarding? Some of these might be the ones you see on screen. How much time does it take to first use those key aha moments? And not just use them one time, but find meaningful use from them. That might mean 3 or 4 times before they really find meaningful use of that feature. Of course, measuring customer sentiment. I spoke of one way to do that through NPS. There are other ways to measure customer sentiment. And then, of course, retention over time. We've talked about that today with the examples that I've shared. So when it's all said and done, the key takeaway really is this, that the product is no longer just one part of the customer experience. It is the experience. So my challenge to you today is to do 3 things. 1, gather the data. It doesn't necessarily matter at first whether or not you identify that second step, what new user actually means. Do the legwork of gathering the data. And then number 2, specify what new user means for you. And then number 3, identify and lean into the key aha moments that matter for that segment that you've identified in step 2. Well, it's been great being with you today. I hope you've learned something about product-led and about onboarding, and thank you so much for joining us.